Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Dear Podcast. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about anxiety. And before we get started, I do want to say that I'm not a doctor, not a psychologist, nothing like this. Everything that I share here is just my personal experience over the past 18 plus years living with anxiety, as well as just my own knowledge that I have learned throughout the years. So this is just purely my point of view on this. And when we're talking about anxiety, then obviously it is classified as a mental illness due to the different chemical imbalances in your brain. However, I don't think there's enough emphasis put on how much it also affects you physically, with how you feel physically, as well as the physical symptoms that anxiety manifests in. And these are also some that I'm going to mention here today. So with anxiety, from my background, ever since I can remember, I've been anxious or had anxiety. And by ever since, I mean ever since when I can remember as a child, so when I was like 5, 6, 7, I guess. I remember throughout my years growing up in kindergarten, middle school, high school, there were always situations where I felt certain weird physical symptoms, I guess, that I just thought were normal and that everybody felt this throughout my years growing up. Whenever we at school, when we had like an event at school, like a graduation or something similar, and we would be sitting in the auditorium with, like rows and rows of chairs. And whenever I would need to sit in the kind of more middle, like of those rows, I remember I'll be feeling like my throat was closing up. I couldn't breathe very well. I felt really uncomfortable. I couldn't really focus on anything. Everything was just super, super overwhelming. And I didn't realize until later in high school that these symptoms were actually anxiety symptoms. And I never said anything about these feelings or symptoms to anyone, just because nobody really was talking about them. So I just felt that there was something weird that was wrong with me. And I didn't want to be the kind of odd one out or the person with something wrong with them. So I never told anyone, like my parents, friends, nobody. I never told them like, sometimes when I'm like in this situation or in that situation, I feel like I can't breathe or I feel lightheaded, etc., etc. I never said those things because I also didn't realize that they were connected to these specific situations. Obviously now looking back, I can see that they were literally connect the dots kind of a thing, but I never, again, growing up, I never realized it because I never knew what anxiety was. It was always more of a thing that, it's something in your head. And there wasn't anything said about any physical symptoms. So when I was in high school, I kind of started to learn more about it and just be more exposed to all of this information. Also just because on social media, it started to come up like slowly but surely. Then at some point I was like, wait, have I had anxiety ever since I was 6, if not even before? Because that's kind of when the earliest that I can remember in that sense, or 5 or 6. And I was like, wait, have I always been anxious and never realized it? And by anxious, I mean being socially anxious and then also having general anxiety disorder as well. I just never realized it because I thought that everything that I felt was kind of normal because I was still doing my thing, even though at sometimes I felt a bit uncomfortable in certain situations. Again, I just never really thought much of it, but I do know that also growing up, I was a big overthinker and I was worried all the time about everything. So that was kind of the mental side of things, and always thinking of like what if thoughts and always thinking the worst thing is gonna happen. I mean, I still kind of grew up like everybody else in that sense. I think I was a regular child or perceived as a regular child. I did like to talk a lot and I was really hyper at times, but I would still say that I was like a regular child in that sense, even though now looking back I can see that there were some like concerning bits, but nobody really picked up on them, so that's that. But anyways, now for the past, I want to say like 6 years, I have started to dig more into the mental health world and try to understand it better myself, just because I always thought that anxiety was something that I guess I was just born with and I must just have it forever, and it must be really, really controlling just because that's all I knew. Fast forward to now, And I realized that that's not really the case, because now I have actually managed to get anxiety under control, and it's not that controlling anymore, and it doesn't really limit my decisions in that sense. I do still get certain anxiety feelings every now and then, because it is normal to feel anxious, because it's just one of the emotions or feelings, but it isn't as extreme as it used to be, where I couldn't even leave my house to go to the store because I was just that anxious, or I couldn't go to certain social outings because I was so anxious. And as I talked in the alcohol episode as well, I would used to need to drink so I wouldn't be socially anxious at parties as well. So that was a whole other thing there. Anxiety as a mental thing, that's one thing. So it's when you're probably always overthinking or thinking of the worst case scenarios. You have a lot of what if thoughts and a lot of just worrying thoughts in general, especially about certain situations that cause you more anxiety. But then coming from the mental side, all of these thoughts also manifest themselves in physical symptoms, because by constantly overthinking and being worried, you're creating just more stress in your body, and then this usually manifests in different physical symptoms, as I just said. So in this episode, I do want to share a few tips and tricks on how to relieve some of the physical symptoms, and how to also kind of some thought patterns that I have adopted that get me through different anxiety or anxious moments in general. And also why it's important to be able to manage your physical symptoms, because at least for me personally, my physical symptoms can even amp up my already existing anxiety, and then it's just kind of like a dead end thing. It's just a snowball effect basically. So I have anxious thoughts, then they create physical symptoms, and those physical symptoms then create more anxiety, and it just keeps going and going. So without any longer introduction here, let's get straight into some of these symptoms, because I feel like I already kind of covered the mental part of how it can be really limiting and almost imprisoning in certain times. Because, again, I remember growing up, I wouldn't go to some hangouts just because I was so anxious and my mind convinced me of all the worst possible scenarios. So a lot of the times I skipped out on different hangouts, and I think that's just kind of what anxiety does, and it can just limit your potential in some cases. But moving to the physical side, then there are so many, and I mean so many different symptoms that can come up, and it can be just so different from person to person. And as I also left on my Instagram, I left this little question box for your main anxiety symptoms, and there were a few different ones, some that I related with and some that were new to me in the sense that I hadn't really experienced it myself. But today I would just bring out a few, kind of the top 5, so some that I have experienced myself, and then some that were also put into the question box, just because there are so many different ones, and I would love to do a whole episode dedicated to all the symptoms and discussing the symptoms. But today I want to have more emphasis on how to tackle the anxiety attack itself. So let's start with some of those symptoms. And these symptoms, they may come up when you're already anxious, so in an anxious state. But these symptoms can also start to build up before an anxious situation. So for example, let's say that you already know that a week from now you're going to have to do something that's a bit more uncomfortable, maybe out of your comfort zone, something that makes you anxious, nervous. And then so those days leading up to that event or situation, your symptoms of anxiety can already start building up. And besides the thoughts, also the physical symptoms. Again, this is something that I had myself. So starting with the first kind of symptom would be anything nausea and stomach related, or your gut related. Your digestive system is considered as a second brain. It is mainly for 2 reasons. One is that whenever you feel anxious, then there are certain chemicals and hormones released into your gut, which then makes your gut react in different ways. So it can result in constipation, diarrhea, bloating, gas, and nausea as well. Because when you're stressed, so those stress hormones as well, then your digestion can slow down or speed up, and then hence constipation from your digestive system slowing down, and then diarrhea from your digestive system speeding up. So your stomach, in that sense, is considered as a second brain. And I believe that it's also because your stomach contains the second largest amount of nerves in your body. I just read it somewhere. So that's also by science, it's in quotes considered as a second brain. I myself have had a lot of gut issues, and especially nausea is something that always comes up when I'm feeling anxious or when it's leading up to an anxious event. And like stomach pains and any type of stomach issue usually shows up as well. For example, growing up, now looking back, I see the patterns. But growing up, whenever, for example, we had like a field trip or something with school, the day before, I would always have the worst stomach ache. And even on the day of going, and I would feel super nauseous. I never wanted to go. And it was all of like these weird feelings and symptoms. And it was just something that kept happening. I was like, okay, that's weird. But I never, again, connected the dots. Now looking back, I can see that I didn't like being away from home. So my body was already just acting that way from anxiety, even though at the time maybe I wasn't really conscious of it. I obviously did want to go. I did want to go hang out with my friends, but this subconscious mind of mine, this anxious mind, actually didn't want to go and caused so much stress that it just manifested in different stomach issues. And now, knowing this, it has helped me so much better to manage my gut health and to manage my digestive system in the sense that it wouldn't be that bothersome. And then nausea, obviously, when we're talking about anxiety in general, then it is kind of a fight or flight situation, and then hence the increased stress hormones as well. With being in fight or flight, obviously you don't have any appetite or anything because your body is literally getting ready to face danger, and therefore nausea is a fairly common and normal, that it's just your body's response. So when you're in danger, you obviously, there's no time to eat, you don't want to eat, nothing like that, even when in reality you are not in an immediate danger or anything like that, but your anxiety, your anxious thoughts just send the same signal to your body as if you were in danger, and then therefore you can also feel nauseous as well. And so the next three symptoms, they are kind of connected with one another. So what I mean is that, for example, dizziness, lightheadedness, and shortness of breath, they all have a similar origin, but again, it just manifests differently in different people. Some might feel dizzy, some might feel lightheaded, some might feel short of breath. But at the same time, it usually comes from the same bodily reaction. So going back to the flight or fight mode that your body kind of enters when you're anxious, your body is starting to get ready to face some danger. So your heart rate starts to go higher. There's more blood being pumped to your organs faster, and your body is kind of tensing up your muscles and preparing them to either, fight or flight. And then from there, you will start to breathe more quickly just to get more oxygen to your muscles. And therefore, that's where the shortness of breath comes from as well. Because when you say quicker breaths, they also can be more shallow. And these can all contribute to feeling either dizzy, short of breath, or lightheaded. All of these physical symptoms, they do have a reason and they do have an explanation, and it usually just stems from the fight or flight mode that your body activates into. So all the symptoms like blurry vision and jelly legs and sweating and all of those things are just result of your body going into fight or flight mode. And additionally, I know that this is something that I didn't realize until I think like 2-3 years back, that there are such things as anxiety shivers or anxiety shakes or something like that. So it's basically when you just get a shiver randomly, like you're not really cold, but your body just like shivers. And this is also as a result of the release of adrenaline and cortisol hormones, aka stress hormones. So this is just your body trying to get rid of that excess energy, aka adrenaline, and to quite literally shake it off. So again, it's just a normal reaction, but it can be weird if you don't know about it and you're like, why am I randomly shaking? Just as there are things that are called like brain zaps, when you feel like this, not electrical, but zap feeling almost over your head. I don't know how to explain it, but it's just also this weird feeling, but it all ties down back to the fight or flight mode. There are, as I said before, there are so many different anxiety symptoms, especially the physical ones, that I could literally keep talking about them. But I do want to get to the other main point of this episode, which is how to get through an anxiety attack. And I know that originally on my Instagram, I did say it was how to get over an anxiety/panic attack. However, I feel like these two, I can't mix them together here, because panic attacks or panic disorder is kind of like a subcategory of anxiety, but I feel like panic attacks deserve their own episode just because there is a lot to cover there as well. So I just want to focus right now on anxiety attacks as such, and then do another episode on panic attacks. But anyways, getting now to the part of how to get through an anxiety attack. Again, here I would like to prefix that sometimes this anxiety attack, it isn't something that just comes over you one day and then it leaves the next. Sometimes you can live in the state of anxiousness for days, weeks, months, years. Again, this is something that I have endured myself, and some might develop anxiety at a later stage in their life, while some might get over their anxiety within a year. So it's just really, really different. The next tips and tricks are more so if you're in the middle of an anxiety attack where all of these physical symptoms are really, really reaching their peak. And these are just some things that you can do to dim it down a little, or to also distract yourself. And I wouldn't say that distracting yourself is the best option, but sometimes you just don't have the energy to put up with all of those symptoms and to manage it. So something that really has helped me with especially having nausea is chewing gum, and especially peppermint flavored. And this also does help with dizziness every now and then. First of all, with chewing gum, especially peppermint flavored, the peppermint kind of gives your senses a more awakened state. I feel like it's more refreshing. So I do advise to have peppermint on hand if you tend to get dizziness from anxiety, or just this lousy, drowsy feeling from anxiety. But also why chewing gum is good, because sometimes when you are really, really anxious and also nauseous and you don't have any appetite and you just, don't really feel like eating, having the chewing gum sends signals into your brain as there's food coming in. And so this can put your body out of that fight or flight mode, because as I said before, if you're in fight or flight mode, your body is not ready to eat anything. It's not ready to digest anything. When you're chewing gum, then it kind of tricks your brain into thinking that the danger has passed, because otherwise you wouldn't be eating anything. Let's face it, if somebody's in danger, they're not going to be eating anything, because all the other senses are on alert to keep them safe. And when you eat chewing gum, then this can also ease up this anxiousness feeling of anticipation and something happening. And with the chewing gum, it is something to keep in mind is that it can also cause bloating. If you chew it too much or too frequently or too often, it can cause bloating and gas and such. So just be wary about it. This is usually kind of my last resort if I feel really, 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 really nauseous, or if I just feel like I need this kind of a peppermint taste. But otherwise, I would use it as a last resort. I used to eat chewing gum a lot, like almost daily, and that was also when it was the peak of my anxiety, so I would also always have it on me. Whereas now I barely eat chewing gum. I still have it on me just in case, but I usually don't even eat it anymore that much. Yeah, I learned this habit when I was in high school. So whenever we had these, again, bigger events in the auditorium, like some lectures or guest speakers, whatever, I would always have chewing gum on me, just because I knew that this would help me focus more, because also peppermint is proven to help you focus as well. I think it's proven, at least for me. I proved it to myself, so for me it's proven. But anyways, it also helps you focus better by chewing gum, or just, if you can obviously actually eat something as well, but usually with nausea you don't really want to eat anything. This also activates your senses of, for example, the taste sense, and can help you ground more when you actually have a flavor as well. So this is why I would just also advise kind of chewing gum as an option. But again, it's not for long term. I learned it myself. It didn't really heal my anxiety. It just helped me cope with it when I really needed it. And then the second point is also kind of related to senses and grounding yourself. So this is something that I have also learned fairly recently, like maybe a year or two back, and that is basically when you have your wrists under cold running water. This also helps to bring down your heart rate or slow down your heart rate, and also it's a nice grounding technique, just because the change of temperature somehow works magic and kind of grounds you back as well, especially again if it is cold water. So if you're in a social function or anywhere and you feel like you need to ground yourself, then I would advise go to the bathroom just real quick, have the coldest water on and just like run it over your wrists, again over the pulse points, and this usually does help. You can also do the same thing with having ice and kind of rubbing it on your wrists, and or when you have a cold water bottle, you can also kind of hold this over the pulse points on your wrist, and this usually brings the heart rate down and it also helps you to calm down. And then whilst you're maybe in the bathroom running your hands under the cold water, then a few other things that you can do that maybe sometimes you're not comfortable in doing in public is that you can just literally shake your whole body. And it does sound a bit weird, but the next ones that I'm going to mention, they are more from the nervous system regulation side. So also shaking your body does help to release, again, the excess adrenaline and cortisol hormones that I mentioned before with anxiety shakes. And this can also help your anxiety to loosen up a little. And then another thing that you can do is you can tap chest collarbone area just with your fingers. Just really light it like a little tapping thing. There's a lot of it also on, I think I saw it on TikTok or YouTube, but I think there's a special name for this tapping technique. But I've seen so many videos of these, and I've just adapted to some that work for me or that are like easiest to do. And one of them is tapping like the chest area collarbone, and that's also just helps you to calm down. And then another one is humming, and just hear me out on this. It has two benefits. One that I learned, again, a long time ago when I was really, really, really nauseous all the time, was that humming actually decreases nausea. I don't know what's the scientific thing behind that. And then secondly, what I saw just recently was that when you breathe in, and then whilst breathing out, when you're humming, something like that, then this also regulates your nervous system and helps you to calm down. This one was advised to just like breathe in regularly and then breathe out and then hum at the same time. And then this vibration that you're causing, or this frequency or vibration that you're causing, then supposedly this calms down your nervous system and it can again just ground you a little bit more. So I would advise doing this. You can also do it even when you're like out in public when there's a lot of noise around you anyway, so nobody could actually really hear you humming. But it's just something that I have tried it out myself a few times, and I do think that it works. So it's worth giving it a shot anyways. One more thing that I just remembered was that another thing you can do if you want to ground yourself, if you just put your hand flat on your chest, kind of like on the upper chest, then this sends the same signals to your brain as if you were hugging somebody. And usually when you're hugging somebody, it calms down your nervous system of giving it a safe feeling. And by putting your own hand on your chest, it resembles the same feeling to your body. That's another thing to keep in mind. Yeah, these were more of those kind of grounding techniques that you can do physically with your body to help bring yourself back to the center. Now I have two more tips or tricks that are more for the mental side of things, the thought patterns to change to and new thoughts to adapt to that could maybe put your anxious mind at ease. So the first two would be distraction methods, and these are again when you just feel like you don't have the energy to take deep breaths, you don't have the energy to, count to 100 and name 5 things you can see and 4 things you can hear and 3 things you can taste and etc. etc. These ones are here just to distract you. First of them is start to memorize a list of something. I got this advice when I was in high school. Whenever I had all of these anxious thoughts in my mind and I was thinking of the worst case scenarios, I started to recall my timetable or my lesson plan at school, and I would just be like, okay, so Monday, what is my Monday timetable or schedule look like again? Okay, what about Tuesday? And then by doing this, it really did help me to not get into this, again, snowball effect of anxiety and its thoughts. And if you don't have a lesson, like a timetable or anything like that, you can also try to memorize like a playlist, like maybe if you have a favorite music playlist, then just try to memorize all the songs that are on there and also in the order, because for some reason it just works. And if anything, then just start to make like random lists, even like grocery list could help, or maybe try to think like, oh, name all the celebrities that start with the letter A or something like that. This helps your brain, because when you're anxious, then it's mainly your emotional side of the brain is working, but then when you start to make those lists, you're using more of your rational, logical side of your brain. So I'm thinking, is that the connection there, that it kind of like balances it out and offers it more of a structure and stability? I'm not sure if that's the case, but it kind of seems that it could be. And then the second distraction method is also, it is a bit similar, but this one was advised to me by a different therapist when my anxiety was that bad that I couldn't even leave my house to do anything. And that was also, this advice was given over an online session because I was too anxious to leave my house to go to the actual therapy session in person. And then she advised me to that when I'm going to the store, then just try to count how many red cars I see on the way, because on my way from home to the grocery store, I will be passing by car parks, crossing roads, and so I would be kind of in the traffic anyways. And then she was like, oh, just try to see how many red cars you see on your way to the store and then back home from the store. And I was like, oh, it's not gonna work, why would I even do it? And I tried it and it actually worked. I was like, wait, like I just went to the store and I did everything I needed and I'm fine. And ever since then, I use it every now and then when I feel like I need to kind of distract myself. Even if I were on a public transportation again, where I used to get a lot of anxiety, then just look around and start to count like how many people are wearing glasses, how many people have a pink clothing item, how many people are wearing a bag. Try to have a thing that is common but not too common, so you still have to think and use your brain, but so it also keeps you kind of in it, so you're distracted again from your own anxious thoughts. And I think this has the same logic of using your logical side of brain and making lists and noticing things. And yeah, this is just something that really, really helped me on my very, very, very tough anxiety days. One last thing that I just remembered that I wanted to say when it comes to the stomach issues and things. Whenever I have a random stomach ache, I'm like, this is weird. Like, it's not the regular stomach ache, like from like cramps or something like that. Or when I'm feeling nauseous, then the first thing I check is like, is my stomach relaxed? And check your stomach right now. Is your stomach relaxed, or are you holding it kind of tense or sucking it in? Because this is something that I notice or catch myself do a lot, is that sometimes I just hold my stomach super tense, and then obviously there's gonna be aches and pains if I'm just like cramping my stomach myself from like tension or stress. Besides relaxing my stomach, I start to take deep breaths, and I mean belly breaths. So when I'm breathing in, then my stomach rises up. Also sometimes get anxious with flying. I remember I had this one time when I was like, everything was fine, and then I sit down and I see the whole airplane is full of people, and I'm like, oh my god, there's so many people here. And I got suddenly super kind of claustrophobic and like feeling and anxious, and we had just boarded the plane. And I was like, oh my god, why am I feeling so nauseous again, etc, etc. And then I was like, wait, I think my stomach is not relaxed, and I don't think I've been breathing properly. So I took a moment, I relaxed my stomach, and I was like, okay, let's do like 3 very deep like belly breaths. And I kid you not, my anxiety just disappeared. And if I'm being completely honest, then I used to not believe all of this talk about breathing and how important breathing is. I think I was so reluctant to it that whenever I tried it, I gave up so quickly, because at the time when my anxiety was at its peak in 2022, I had a lot of health anxiety as well. So controlling my breath sent me into another spiral, especially when it's breathing for 4 seconds and hold it for 7 and then breathe out, etc. These ones, they didn't help me at the time of my peak anxiety, because I didn't like when my breath was being controlled this strongly, and I was just really, really anxious with breathing. So at the time it didn't work for me, but now those deep breaths and everything, they do work for me. It just takes time to get used to it as well. So don't be too hard on yourself with all of those tips and tricks, because they might not all work for you, but I do hope that some of these do. And also another thing that does help is when you can just talk to somebody and just talk about anything else, or have them distract you with something. And or if that's not possible, then for example, I sometimes, especially when I get anxious on planes, I'm like, I don't have the energy to do all of those grounding things, I'm like, I'm gonna just distract myself with Netflix. And I just watch a few episodes and then I'm fine. And I know that watching Netflix and distracting yourself like this isn't really ideal. But I do think that at some times, for example, especially being on an airplane, which is kind of a closed space, it's not always the easiest to get through an anxiety attack. So in these situations, I do give myself a lot of grace. Two last things here before I wrap this part up. Here are some of the affirmations that I used to say when I really needed to ground myself and support myself mentally. So one of them being, all is well, I am safe. And this is something that was probably on loop in my brain for months at some point. Then, I have felt this way before and nothing bad happened. And I know it can be difficult because you're like, well, what if this is the time when something happens? But just be like, I have been in this situation before, everything went fine, and there's no reason why it shouldn't go fine this time as well. So you kind of have to convince your brain there. And then the last one is that this feeling won't last forever. In the moment, in the midst of an anxiety attack, it can feel like this feeling will last forever and ever and ever. And especially if you're someone who is anxious almost all the time or 24/7, which, yes, it does happen. I've been there myself. Then it is hard to convince yourself with this feeling won't last forever. But the thing is, it has to stop eventually. And I think this is what also got me through with my really, really bad anxiety and depression era. I was like, this has to stop at some point. This feeling has to stop at some point. It can't last forever. Even though it did last for a couple of months, I knew that eventually it had to stop. Repeating these sentences all the time helps, as well as I think there on Spotify and YouTube there are a lot of affirmation playlists that you can listen to, especially if at first it feels weird to say them and it just feels really cringy and awkward. Then just listening to these affirmations while somebody else is saying it, I feel like it kind of makes it a bit easier. And then it also, if you're listening to it on repeat, then it eventually gets into your subconsciousness as well and you start to believe it. Just so you know that you can coexist with your anxiety. You are not your anxiety. It is just a byproduct. This is actually another thought that I have that I learned from TikTok, I think last year, was something along the lines of, okay, anxiety, I understand that you're here right now, but that doesn't mean that I can't do XYZ. For example, if you're at a bar with your friends and you're feeling really anxious, then you're like, okay, anxiety, I know that you're here right now, but I am here with my friends and I can hang out with them. Just because you're here doesn't mean that I can't, chat with my friends or can't do this or that. And just acknowledging your anxiety and giving it space to be, but not really letting into it and be like, okay, anxiety, you can be here, but I can also be here and I can be with my friends here and have a good time, even though you're also present. So that's just something to try out. There are 2 Instagram accounts whom I really, really advise to follow. Honestly Holistic, I think. I'm gonna put the handles in my description here. And then she shares so many anxiety symptoms, and she's the reason why I also feel comfortable talking about anxiety and the symptoms, because she normalized it to me so much, and I never realized that other people feel this way either until I came across her Instagram quite a few years back. And then the second one would be A Healthy Push, and she is the one who has a more approach of doing things despite being anxious, and just has a really nice healthy approach to anxiety and panic attacks. So she's also somebody that I would advise you to check out on Instagram. I think she also has a podcast as well. Anyways, these are just the 2 that I recall right now. And now wrapping it up with this episode here. I know that in this episode I shared a lot on how to cope with anxiety and how to handle anxiety attacks and those symptoms. But something that is really, really important is to actually find the root causes of your anxiety, because this is the only way you can actually heal the anxiety itself. Because how can you actually fix something if you don't know the root cause of it or the real reason why it exists? And I know that it's sometimes hard to believe that there could be an actual reasoning behind your anxiety. I believe that there is, and if you'd like, I can do another episode on this, on the root causes of anxiety and how to find yours, because I do think that that's the key. For now, you can just use those tips and tricks that I shared here to manage your anxiety, but if you really want to tackle it head on, I do think that you have to find root causes for them. Because I myself, I didn't realize my root causes until like 2 years ago. And I'm still discovering more and more, because turns out I do have a lot of anxiety with me with different situations, so I'm still uncovering those. But in the meantime, it is totally fine to just cope to the best of your abilities, and when you're ready to face those root causes and learn more about them and figure them out, then do it at your own time. There's no rush. And I do want to say that I still do feel anxiety every now and then. I get anxious, and that is totally fine and normal, because I think I said it before as well, but it's just one of the feelings or emotions that everybody feels. But it's not that extreme anymore, to the point where it controls my life and my decisions and everything else about my life. I just want to say that you're not alone if you're in the very midst of your anxiety journey. Trust me, I have been there. It is not always a nice place to be, but just by experiencing all of it and now looking back, I can just see that everything that I experienced with my anxiety, all the different aspects to my anxiety journey, they were necessary for me, even though at the time when I was going through it, I was like, this is so unfair, yada yada yada. I didn't have high hopes with anxiety, basically, or ever being able to be free of it or talk about it so freely and not be that affected by it. But right now I can say, yes, that my anxiety, it is still present every now and then, but it is not that dominating as it used to be. And this is already a win for me, because I am fairly new on this anxiety healing journey. So I am giving myself some grace and time to get adjusted and adapted, and just taking it, one day at a time, with one physical symptom at a time. I do hope that at some point I can just say that anxiety, so this is my goal. I hope that this episode, that maybe it resonated with some of you. Maybe you learned something here that helps you on your anxiety journey. And please let me know on Instagram, what do you think about this episode? How are your relations with anxiety? Because I know that this is not something that is talked about that much. It does get some coverage, but this is something that can get dismissed a lot, and you can be made to feel like what you're feeling isn't real, or that you're imagining things. But I can assure you that all of those physical anxiety feelings and symptoms, they are real. You're not really imagining it, but your body is actually manifesting them from those stress hormones and everything that are being released when you're anxious. Just know that everything that you're feeling, that is totally valid, and nobody can tell you otherwise. I just hope that this episode just spoke to some of you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.